Welcome to the B2B Brand 180 podcast, a place where we focus on transformative strategies and innovative approaches in B2B branding. Today, you'll learn how to make a 180-degree shift in your marketing efforts or actually complete reversals in your brand strategies. And I'm Linda Fanaris, and I am excited to bring in Dan Balcauski, and he is the founder and chief pricing officer at Product Tranquility. They are out of Austin, Texas, where we all love Austin, Texas. And he focuses on really helping those high volume B2B SaaS CEOs determine pricing and packaging and anything that they need to roll out new products. So, Dan, it's great to have you here. I'd like for you to take a couple minutes and introduce yourself to our audience and maybe share some insight.
Yeah, well, very excited to be here. Thank you for hosting me, Linda. Well, you did a wonderful job in the intro. So, as you mentioned, I run a consulting firm called Product Tranquility, focus on helping high volume B2B SaaS CEOs define pricing and packaging for new as well as optimizing for existing products. So, I've been doing that for over 6 years now, which is a little bit amazing to think about. But yeah, I've been in the tech space my entire career. Started off more on the building side and realized that the computers did not care how angry I got at it, still would not run the code that I tried to have it run. So quickly realized that my interests and talents were better suited, more focusing on how the products that we were building actually created value for customers and how that value turned into dollars and cents for the business. And then there's kind of a long winding path from there to where I am today. But yeah, I have the honor and privilege today of helping a lot of SaaS CEOs and the leadership teams to make sure their products are profitable and successful and match the value that they provide their customers.
Yeah, that's great. And SaaS is there are lots of SaaS products out there. I think pricing can be a little challenging, and however you bundle things up or packaging can also be challenging. And often people just don't get it right, or they're not sure where to start. Maybe they'll take a look at some competitors and make a best guess and go from there. But I'd love to hear from you. What do people really get wrong about pricing?
Yeah, well, there's a long list, but I would say at the most fundamental level, when it comes to SaaS pricing, most executives think that what you charge determines your success. In fact, who and how you charge determines your success. So, said another way, if I was advising a team, I would say spend most of your time on what the price tag goes on and little time on what number goes on the price tag. So when I say I do pricing, a lot of folks immediately, like, oh, should our prices end in fives or nines?
Right.
Or,
Right.
those are fun, interesting conversations, but they tend to be the least impactful. And you pointed it out sort of in the premise of your question, which is a lot of the conversation is, do we even have the right things bundled together? Because, we don't, really comes from an understanding of your customers and what they need and working sort of backwards from the customer. And a lot of folks really start, especially a lot of technical teams, you get companies that are
Yes.
founded by a couple of engineers that really enamored with the technology and start with the features and capabilities and just like, oh, well, this is a feature that it was really hard to build, and so we should charge people for it. So, well, your customers don't really care that it was hard for you to build, right? Then
Right.
what
Of
job
course.
does it get done for them? But then also, right, as you go into the marketplace, that you don't want to force, is not only making sure that those features are land in the right spot, but that you're able then to communicate that in a language that the customer understands. So, versus not using sort of feature language, but benefit and value language as well, because to be able to communicate to people that, hey, like this is, this package is for you. This is the benefits it gets without, listing, the 200 separate features that might be in your
Right.
particular software product, which could be overwhelming as well.
Right, and I think, interesting to your point there, because since there are a lot of SaaS products out there, and you may have a couple techies that are building something out that's really cool and innovative and hasn't really hit the market yet. But on the other hand is, who are you selling to? Which I think is what you were getting at. Okay, so who are
Mhm.
you selling to? And then what are they interested in buying? And then what are they interested in paying? How do you go about figuring out, I'm assuming you're looking at the market, you're looking at competitors, you're looking at the features, you're looking at the benefits, you're looking at all the other things that may impact their pricing. But what is your tactic as far as how would you go into somebody to help them with this process?
Yeah, well, in lieu of teaching an 8-week course, to answer your question, I'll kind of start at the high level, which is, I saw so many challenges with companies trying to tackle this problem. And I notice as patterns that companies tend to face four big problems over and over again. They don't really know who their customers are. They don't understand how their product helps customers. They can't explain why their product is special, differentiated, and they forget that pricing is more than just picking a number. So to help those problems, I created a model that I use all the time. I call it the services model. It stands for SVCS, or the four letters of the acronym: segments, value, competition, and strategy. So just
Mhm.
if I kind of break that down, the first three elements, so segments, so who are your
Right.
customers? What do they, who are they and what do they want? Right. Because we often think, get stuck on that element of just firmographics or demographics. Oh,
Mhm.
this is an enterprise customer, it's a
Mhm.
small business customer,
Right.
it's a college educated consumer,
Right.
right? But that doesn't really tell me much about what they need and
Right.
why they might make a different purchase decision. Next is value. Like, how does your product help customers? Why is that important to them? C is competition. Like, what other
Mhm.
choices do customers have? And then these first three elements, can be considered sort of inputs to the pricing process, because your pricing power ultimately comes from understanding the differentiated value that you create for a particular customer segment beyond the competitive alternatives that are available.
Mhm.
So those three elements then filter down to the final piece, which is strategy. So, like, how will you sell your product to the right customers in a way that effectively communicates why you're different and why you can help them, and does it in a efficient way that your team doesn't have to go through a full-on explanation of the history of all the features that you possibly could do, right? But that
Mhm.
helps lubricate your go-to-market engine versus becoming sand in that go-to-market engine, right? And strategy I use in the Michael Porter sense of the word, because strategy is ultimately about making trade-offs. And this is where
Mhm.
teams get real nervous, because you can't make everyone happy. And ultimately, pricing is one of these areas where this is where the rubber hits the road. Like, you
Right.
can you can have the sort of corporate strategy session where they come out with a list of goals and everyone sort
Mhm.
of is like, well, all these things are in diametric opposition to each other, but I guess I'll just go back and do my work. But you can't come out of a pricing exercise that way. It's like, we have to figure out who are our customers and who are we actually trying to serve, and who are we not interested in serving.
Mhm.
And that really forces a trade-off, because you're often left with a lot of very difficult decisions that pertain to things that, hey, this group of customers receives or perceives value in an entirely different way, right? And so if
Right.
we charge per user in this context, these customers will be really happy, but it'll really alienate these ones. If we charge per gigabyte of data stored, vice versa, right? And so we've
Mhm.
got to sort of, and that's where this rubber hits the road of these trade-offs. And so we've got to really understand which customers we focus on. How will you show them your product's your best choice, and how will you package and price your product to make it easy for them to buy? So
Yeah.
pricing is just not about picking a number. It's really about understanding those customers and smart choices, how to align what you sell with the value that you ultimately provide.
Now, Dan, I'm sure you're challenged from time to time when you are working with SaaS customers, those who actually have similar or competitive products in the market. So you're looking at pricing strategy, and to your point, you're looking at a lot of other things: ICP, their potential customer profile, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
When somebody is releasing a new product that is in a highly competitive market where there's generally a pricing structure that might be set out there, how do you come into the market? Do you come in less? Do you come in the same? Do you come in more? Do you try to push on your differentiators? Are there certain tactics and strategies that you use to help, leverage a new launch that may be in a competitive market?
So, look, ultimately, it comes down to what is your goal, right? And you'd be surprised. This is another area where companies go a long way without ever officially sort of writing down what
Mhm.
they're trying to achieve.
Right.
Um, and so, we really want to understand, okay, is our goal to go grow top line revenue? Are we trying to increase profit? Are we really concerned about more, unit economics type increases, like customer lifetime value, or reducing our customer acquisition costs? What are we going after? Because
Mhm.
the answer to your question is like, well, if your goal is to grab market share, I'm going to give you a
Right.
very different answer to that than if your goal is to maximize revenue, or
Correct.
maximize profitability. Uh, so, one of the very first things that I often need to do is help everyone come to the table about what your goal is. And so it's kind of funny, because you'll often get a bit of an eye roll
Right.
from members of the executive team
Right.
because you'll
Or
ask a
may
question, right?
mm,
That's the benefit of a consultant, right? We get to ask the stupid questions because we
right.
don't know, right? So you'd be like, "Well, what is your goal with your pricing change?" I'll be talking to the CMO. Oh, eye roll. Well, of course, it's to increase, how many leads we can
Market
get,
share or
right?
whatever, yeah.
Market share, right? And you go to CFO. Well, what's the goal? Oh, of course, it's to increase gross margin, right?
Right.
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 And so then I get to walk into the room with all of them, be like, okay, all of you are 100% convinced that you know what the goals are, and you're right, except none of you are sharing the same goal. So let's get that aligned first. And that might seem like business 101, but surprisingly common and maybe not as a surprise to you,
No.
having done this for very long.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was the first thing I thought of. I'm like, "Wow, you're gonna get all these people in a room and actually get an agreement on the first shot." It seems like that would take some time.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
totally
Uh,
agree with that. Go ahead.
but there's no right, one answer to rule them all in those cases. What I will point out are a couple of patterns that you tend to see in, especially in the tech space, where you will tend to see a lot of companies try to go for, especially if they're like venture capital funded. You saw this a lot with like Uber, for example. Uber and Lyft, we all benefited for, I don't know, 8 years with venture
Mhm.
capital subsidized
Mhm.
rides, right? Because
True.
they were just trying to go grab market share, and they
Correct.
were just funneling money into it, either just paying out of cost or even below that. In the Why would they do that? Is because there was a fundamental belief that that was a network effects business, and that once you were the dominant player, you had an unassailable position, and at that point, then you had market power to raise pricing long term. So,
Right.
what does that mean? It means the answer also depends upon what is the relevant time frame.
Mhm.
Because, if I'm playing a 10-year, I need to win this market, at all cost game, and we're in a market dynamics where there's going to be one winner, there's going to be just one Meta, or there's going to be just one Google, then I may have very different incentives that affect my pricing strategy today than otherwise. In B2B, it's much less clear that those winner take all
Right.
dynamics are actually as relevant. And so I see a lot of folks who uh, use hope as a strategy of, look, we'll go. One topic you'll hear a lot in the software world is land and expand.
Mhm.
We'll
Mhm.
go land all these customers and then we'll
R
upsell them,
well
right?
up the yeah.
But that tends to be more hope than strategy. It's not
Mhm.
usually aligned. It's not usually outlined very clearly what that path is. They haven't really thought about what's the customer value journey you're going to take them on that merits them actually paying you for that next step and that next step.
Right.
Or that's, hey, that's a future roadmap. We'll build those capabilities after we go get all
Mhm.
this marketplace. So there's usually not a great approach in B2B markets. You tend to see a very different dynamics. And so that's one thing I would always caution people: beware the lessons you learn as a B2B leader, that you say, oh, well, this worked for Amazon, this worked for Uber,
Right.
this worked for Google in this other, consumer space, and you try to bring it over to a B2B space. It tends to be very different because, look, B2B buyers don't like winner take all markets. They like being able to play
True.
suppliers off each other. So the B2B markets are like sort of self-healing a lot in that way, where they'll be like, oh, hey, we don't want I'm not going to give this business. I'm going to pay Microsoft and Apple and whoever else this money for all my, whatever services, because,
Mm,
I don't want
right.
any of them to run away with the lead.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's great feedback, and I appreciate that. So I do have an interesting question because I think pricing can be a little more complicated than often companies or marketers or CEOs can think about. Can you explain the difference between a price metric versus a value metric? How that might play into, what you do?
Yeah, so when I think about, well, I'll take a step back because we were talking about pricing and packaging writ large. And so packaging, if you've only been in a CPG space, you might think like, oh, what is he talking about? Like the cardboard cartons with the right colors on it. Like, no, within the world of SaaS, I break the packaging aspect into four different elements. So just real quick, those would be things like your price metric. So that's a unit of value I charge a customer for. Is that seats, API, data,
Mhm.
your price model. So this defines how and when payments flow through a system. So this is a perpetual license. I pay you once and then I can go use software forever. Is it a subscription? Is it more of a pay as you go type model, like a utility billing model, like you might have for your electric company bill? They charge meter how much you use and then send your bill at the end of the month. There's your bundles or offer
Mhm.
configurations. So these
Mhm.
would be things we often see, like a good, better, best type of, hey, we've grouped sets of capabilities together in predefined ways to help you make your purchase selection better. And then finally, you have like your price fences. So these are often distinctions of how two different customers can pay different prices for the same product.
Mm.
We have this all the time in consumer markets, right? If I get on the bus, I'm going to pay one price, but a student or a senior citizen may pay an entirely separate price, right? We have similar
Right.
effects in the B2B world. So you asked specifically about price metrics and value metrics. And I'm glad
Mhm.
you asked about this because one thing that can be frustrating for even pricing folks, let alone anyone trying to look in from the outside and understand the space, is that the pricing world has not aligned on definitions.
Right.
I try to be consistent. So price metric ultimately, it could be things like the numbers of gigabytes of data stored or transferred, or
Mhm.
number of API calls, or the number of
Yep.
seats that you need to buy,
Yep.
right? But all of those things are very product facing, right? They're things that we can count as the vendor that scale with usage, right? If a
Correct.
company's coming in and buying 10 seats, you
Mhm.
know, ultimately they should pay a lower price than company coming in who needs to buy 1,000 seats, right? And
Right.
so this is a way for my price to scale. But what's missing in that is, does that pricing metric align with the value that your customers are receiving from the product you offer? So the idea of a value metric is, the value metric is entirely customer focused. So
Mhm.
it's the metric that a customer is going to use to judge the effectiveness of the product in their environment. So
Mhm.
are we helping them save time, save money, increase their revenue, decrease risk? And those are sort of what we think of as like functional value metrics. There might also be, more emotional type metrics, right? A Timex and a Rolex have the same functional requirements, but one has a very different emotional effect than another. But in the B2B space, we really want to understand like how our customers are thinking about judging the value of our product, and then picking a price metric that correlates with that value. Because although we may say, "Hey, Linda, I know we're talking about some marketing technology platform that your marketing team wants to buy, and we're going to make all of your campaigns more efficient, and it's going to ultimately drive a ton of revenue for your business." Right? We've showed you the ROI
Mhm.
spreadsheet, right, of how much money we're going to make for you. We may not be able to, for a whole bunch of reasons, just say, "Well, how much revenue are you making now?"
Right.
And then a year we'll check in and ask you how much revenue, and then we'll just take a percentage of that revenue that
Yeah.
because you're going to turn around and you're going to say, well, you are responsible for all of that, and we had to do a bunch of work, and there's
Mhm.
going to be a whole bunch of reasons, right? But that doesn't that but we so instead we want to look at, okay, in general, Linda's buying this marketing technology platform because we're helping her increase her revenue for her business. What what is the components that we can track that correlate to ultimately that value, such that, because it might not be seats. And often for marketing
Right.
technology, it's not, right? It's not like my marketing campaigns, the more successful they are, I
No.
increase my
Yeah.
marketing headcount, right? It's usually something else. And you'll find most marketing technology businesses, it's more like, if you like MailChimp, it's like the size of
Yeah,
your
credit.
contact
Yeah,
database, or like how
exactly.
many accounts
Yep.
you have right in
Yep.
there.
Yep.
Right? That's more aligned with how value scales in that space, versus if you're in the CRM or sales space, you've got, per seat model tends to
Mhm.
dominate because
Mhm.
you've got quota carrying reps, and every rep you have means they're holding the bag for that much more quota. And so it does scale nicely with revenue. So you see these patterns start to emerge, that although both have the same value metric of helping you increase revenue, you might choose different pricing metrics.
And I think that's what you see a lot of today, where you didn't see as much of it before, but if you're buying a SaaS product now, you might be buying credits or so many API calls or so many whatever. It could be anything. Could be photo images, could be seats, blah, blah, blah. So the list goes on. So
Mhm.
I totally understand that. But I did want to ask you one final question before we get to our rapid fire question is, how should sort of a CMO, CEO execute an actual price increase? Are there a couple different tactics that you can share with me today or share with our audience?
So like anything else, start with your goal. What is it you're trying to actually achieve? And get folks aligned on that because, it's like, we want to increase price is not a goal in and of itself. It's a means to an end. And so what you want to be able to do is say, okay, we want to, use this as a lever to increase overall retention. If we do that, we expect you should go through a bit of modeling, right? And be like,
Mhm.
okay, we would expect there's going to be a cohort of customers that are totally fine with it. We're never going to hear a peep from. There's going to be a cohort of customers who are going to complain, but they'll continue with. There's going to be a cohort of customers that tell us to go pound sand, and they're going to go find another vendor, right? And so now I've got, okay, my goal. I've got some idea of what might happen. I've done some customer segmentation
Mhm.
based upon that, right? I have some idea of, hey, there may be some different levels of risk embedded here. And this is another area where something like B2C versus B2B becomes very important because think about Netflix
Right.
raising prices, right?
Yep.
If they lose any given customer, that one customer is not any more important than any other customer. However, if you're in a B2B scenario, you
Mhm.
might 20% of your accounts might be 80% of your revenue.
True.
So I might want to cordon that off, be like, okay, let's look at all the long tail, the 80%, and let's go experiment on our messaging and communication strategy on that before we get to JP Morgan and Disney and Sony and have them tell us to go pound sand because that's going to ruin our year, not just our
Right.
quarter if they
Right.
leave.
Yeah.
Also, not a bad idea to, you know, have conversations, right? Have your sales team or sales or customer success,
Mhm.
whoever might be handling it, arm them with logic, help them role play, right? A lot of this is enablement on the front end, but you can do sort of iterative rollouts, right? Nothing says, "Hey, I've got to," and specifically right now I'm talking about changing pricing on existing customers because
Right.
changing pricing on new customers, I don't know about you, I'm a pricing expert and
Mhm.
if I go to a website today, I was like, I just assume that's what their price has been. I'm not like going back and doing a bunch of historical research to figure out if they changed their price in the last
Mhm.
6 months. So changing price on a new customer is just change your price. Like, and then, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But the tricky part is on the existing customers.
That makes
Build
Yep.
out what your communication strategy is. Use a scientific method, like much like you would for any new marketing campaign. Be like,
Mhm.
hey, we expect to see this kind of uplift. We expect to see this many people tell us to go pound sand. If it's underneath 5%, our model still works. So I'm going to go send a sample of a hundred or 1,000 emails, right?
Mhm.
Oh, we actually didn't hear anything from 1,000. All right, well, like, let's throw out the next 1,000 and then,
Right.
but, oh, wait, hold on. We threw our first 1,000, we hear from 10%. Ooh, okay, what was it? What did we not understand? What could we tweak in our messaging,
Yeah.
et cetera, all right?
Yep. No,
And so,
that's
there are those ways to de-risk any of those. And I tend to find that, look, uh, pricing tends to be very emotional,
Mm.
as much for the people inside the vendor. Probably more so than it is for the customers.
Right.
There's a lot of worry and projection done from inside the building to customers, and most customers kinda shrug and be like, "Yeah, yeah, okay." Obviously, there are there are the exceptions. Those tend to end up on the front page of the New York Times, but there's we could talk we'll unravel some of those in a deeper dive if we had more time, but,
Right.
in
Absolutely.
general, there's not you're probably not gonna make headlines with your 10% price increase.
So, what I'd love to do now, Dan, is I'd like to ask a few rapid fire questions. So, what does that mean to you? So, you would be responsible for answering the questions with like maybe 2 to 3 sentences. I'd love to try to get it through as many as we possibly can. And it goes pretty quick. So, you may have to speak fast, but I would love to get started on that. Are you good with that?
I'm game, let's go.
All right, let's go. So, who should be responsible for pricing decisions?
I would give the ownership to product marketing.
Awesome. Okay. Is freemium a good idea?
No.
Okay. And what are the advantages of free trials?
So free trials are I recommend almost always the better answer in B2B over freemium because they allow your prospects' perceived value of your product to increase, but then also give them a deadline to make a decision to drive action, which freemium doesn't have. So
Right.
definitely in favor of free trials, not in favor of freemium in general.
Good. Good to know. Okay, awesome. So should a company actually show pricing on its website?
It depends.
Okay.
If you're the only company in your space who doesn't have public pricing, you're gonna have a bad time. If you need or if public pricing and packaging can help you filter out non-qualified prospects because your sales team's time is very expensive and you don't wanna have them quote data on every call that they could just have on the web, especially if that, conversation tends to be like, "Oh, well, if I knew that much, I wouldn't have had this
Mhm.
conversation." So it could be a good filtering mechanism, understanding what your competition is doing, and then also goes to, like, what kind of market are you in, and what is the current complexity of your pricing and packaging? Because I've definitely worked with clients where it would not help to put their 50-page PDF, price list at, 10-point
Correct.
font on the website, have it public. No one would understand what they were even looking at in that case. If you have that situation, just call me and we can help
Yep,
sort
we'll
it out.
help. You'll help. And my last question is how should companies deal with inflation? Should they actually raise their prices?
Well, I'm hoping we're gonna see the end of this inflationary environment. You've seen a lot of companies already do so. In B2B SaaS, it actually has not been a predominant
Mhm.
driver because the cost of goods sold and the gross margins are nowhere near what they are in more CPG or other industries. So, you've seen a lot of that already push through the market in B2B SaaS. It hasn't really been a factor. So
Okay,
I have a
perfect.
longer answer.
You
I
have
have
a
a very
longer
extensive,
okay.
but this is the rapid fire question. That is
Yeah, this
that's
is
a
a
very difficult rapid fire
it
question.
is, it is. Some of these are really tricky. So anyway, Dan, so we're gonna wrap it up. So I appreciate all of the insight that you shared on SaaS pricing and packaging and who's making those decisions and how. So I would love for you to tell our audience how they can get in touch with you, where you come in to help and any other information you'd like to share.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for to your listeners for their time and attention. I'm happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn at Dan Balcauski. I also have a podcast called SaaS Scaling Secrets, where I interview CEOs of scale up B2B SaaS companies. So you can find that wherever podcasts are available. And then, look, happy if folks have specific pricing, packaging questions, reach out. Happy to have a conversation and see then if it if if I can be helpful.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. So I just want to take a moment and thank our audience for listening in today. Again, this is Linda Finaris, the host of the B2B Brand 180 podcast. Thanks for listening in to Dan and hearing about how to really price out SaaS products in the most effective way. And if you need any support in that area, please reach out to Dan. Thank you again for listening.